Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today's book review is on Mongrels by Stephen Graham Jones. I'm just gonna put it right here because I'm tired today and I don't want to hold up a book, even though it's a short book. It's only 297 pages and it's one of the earlier Stephen Graham Jones books. Like, he wrote it, I should know, he wrote it some time ago. So you might all know him more for My Heart is a Chainsaw. My thought was going back, taking a chance, and going back and reading some of his earlier works, which many people understand, let's just say, that books written early on in a writer's career usually aren't the best. Let's just be honest, because you're learning and you're writing out these stories as you're learning everything that, you know, I mean, you're constantly learning, okay. But like, really in the beginning, the first, I'm gonna say 3 to 5 books, honestly, are going to be mind-blowing. And this kind of happened with Mongrels. I give it 3.5 out of 5 stars. You can't do 0.5s on Goodreads or Amazon or anything like that, so I did put it at 3 stars instead of bumping it up to 4. The story is really interesting, the world building is fascinating, and the characters are also very intriguing, but I'm going to say, first off, the main character doesn't have a name. So it switches to first and third person. So in first person, the main character is speaking, but his aunt and uncle, Libby and Darren, they don't ever call him by a name. So that was interesting. It was an interesting choice. I can't think of a book that I've read that had that kind of thing. I think that was trying to go for like an artistic feel of mystery with the main character, because for half of the book it's in first person and he's telling his story, but then also it switches to third person when you're jumping back into time. Well, not the whole see, this is where it's 3.5 out of 5 stars for me. So here it's a little kind of difficult to explain. So the things that I had problems with, the main character doesn't have a first name, so it's kind of difficult to connect with him. And you might say, okay, who cares if someone has a first name? I think the mysteriousness was trying to be portrayed, but I just felt distant. The time jumps and the very not linear storytelling was also an issue. I don't like those. In one chapter, it's a story from when he's 7, and then in the next chapter, it's a story when he's 14, and then the next chapter is when he's 10, next chapter, you know, so on and so forth. It's a little hectic when you're jumping so much and you have to figure out which age we're talking about and which state, because they're moving everywhere because they're werewolves and they can't stay in one place. And for the main character, he is trying to figure out if he's going to become a werewolf like his aunt and uncle. And so that is really the main theme of these little stories. So it's a book, but it's like short stories, and then finally at the end of the novel, then we get to see if he turns out to be a werewolf or if he's just a regular human being. And then I also had a bit of an issue with the first person and the third person, and it was not in any sort of order. I mean, there are some times, and I've read some books, which I wasn't a huge fan of, but at least it was first chapter, first person, and then the second chapter was third person, and then third chapter was first person. And kind of, it was like a rhythm you know, and there was a pattern. There's no pattern that I can tell with Mongrels, and that was a little difficult for me because of my ADHD. I kind of need a little bit of a pattern or else I get distracted. So there was some distraction going on. I don't know if other people, you know, with ADD or ADHD have had issues finishing it, especially because it's only 297 pages, but it took me longer than I thought because I just couldn't focus. There was too much jumping, and the first person and the third person really was getting to me as well. And then I think with, I would say, I don't know if it would be horror, maybe thriller, psychological thriller maybe, because it is very violent, but that's kind of what you expect with werewolves. So that's not a problem for me. I enjoyed the werewolf human interaction, and also the aunt and uncle, and like their stories of like how and why they turn and what happens when they turn into werewolves and all of that. I liked that. I thought that was the very interesting part of werewolf in this world. It's not like it's not like, wait, what is it? American Werewolf in London or something, or just any type of other werewolf. This is more chill in the sense that there's way different rules. So they can turn whenever they want to, but when they get older, like, you know, you're 65, let's say, you could die if you decide to turn into a werewolf, because it takes so much out of you. But you can definitely turn when you're, you know, 16 to like early 30s, like that's not a problem. But when you get older and older, then it's like you might want to not. But the werewolf is so powerful that people can't usually, you know, help it because it's part of them. And so there is a lot of death of like an older person that's half turned, and then the other half is it still human. And that's a really intriguing thought, and like you kind of picture it as the main character is talking, you're like, oh, that's creepy. And that's also really sad. So there's a lot of sadness, and there's a lot of violence, and there's a lot of uncomfortable situations. That's why I would say psychological thriller. Uncomfortable situations. I can see a lot of people not like Mongrels because there are some scenes where you're just like, oh, which I didn't mind. I've read more messed up things. I've gone through more messed up things. It's not gonna bother me. But yeah, for someone that hasn't read a lot of horror, or kind of hasn't experienced, sorry or not sorry, a lot of depressing shit in their life, they might walk away from this book disgusted. That's what psychological thrillers and the horror genre as a whole is all about. So I do, you know, recommend this book if you're interested in werewolves, but just be aware of all the things that I mentioned before. I would recommend it for people that want to read own voices, because Stephen Graham Jones is Indigenous, and so Darren, Libby, and the main character, that sounds so weird, I can't even say the main character's name, they're Indigenous as well, and that is kind of the interesting part, because they are not on a reservation, they don't have any close family after their grandfather dies, so they're nomads, they just travel around and they don't stay in one place because, like I said, they're werewolves and they don't want to get caught, quite frankly. And they just, you know, what Darren has said to the main character, and the main character has said overall, is they don't fit into society. And so they just need to keep traveling because they don't fit into society because of what they do. Like, they need to hunt, and sometimes they attack people on accident because they turn into werewolves, and they're, you know, someone, or like a dog, you know, a sheep, whatever, gets in the way, and then they have to leave. things like that. And I think that's very interesting to see, because I have known a few family friends that were Indigenous. They did not stay in one place because they just didn't feel like they could stay in one place. They just wanted to travel. They wanted to see every, you know, I think like one or two of them wanted to see every state, and that's a great goal. This is not really the same for Mongrels. They stayed just in the South. They didn't move upwards, and I don't know why, and that wasn't really talked about, but they just stayed in the South, like Florida to the edge of Texas. I don't even think they went to Arizona or New Mexico, and they didn't go to California. So it's kind of just like a little spot right here in America that they just kept going back and forth to. And that's an interesting idea to explore, because I mean, there are a lot of people that do that, but I think the thought process, maybe, I guess I'm just gonna go with thought process because I can't think of the word right now. The thought process of a lot of people, unfortunately, is that Indigenous people are only on reservations, and that's not accurate. I know a lot of Indigenous people that are not on reservations and that they're living in New York City, LA, Florida, like, because they love Disney World and they work at Disney World. Like, we have to open, you know, the horizon, our eyes, our minds. That sounded a little weird. Okay, we have to realize that Indigenous people are not just on the reservation, and I think this story helps, and that's actually what Stephen Graham Jones talks about in the back, where his family moved around a lot. It was just movement, and he wasn't on the reservations, and he wanted to write about someone that wasn't on a reservation. And because I know of, you know, the family friends, but I haven't yet read a book where they're, you know, something like Stephen Graham Jones said, and I think he also noticed that as well, so that's why he put in a lot of movement with Mongrels. But it works with Mongrels because they're werewolves and they get into a lot of trouble, and so they have to move. I think that is a fantastic way to bring that into the center of people's minds. And then when you go back and to read the back extra bonus stuff, which was really fascinating, I think you should do that, with him talking about how his family moved all the time and how he wanted to portray that in you know, a novel, and so he shaped that idea around werewolves. Oh, and the fact that he wanted to become a werewolf when he was younger. I forgot which movie, TV show he watched as a kid, and then that's why he wanted to become a werewolf. It's always like, do you want to become a werewolf or a vampire? I think a little nowadays, because of the Lord of the Rings, you want to become a fairy or a dwarf. I know there's just that kid mentality where you want to become some supernatural or like mythical creature, and he drifted towards werewolves. I remember I drifted towards vampires and elves. Okay, so I definitely relate to him talking about how he desperately wanted to be a werewolf, and he was moving around a lot, because I did move around a lot as well, and that he was poor. I was also poor, and what you saw in the movies and the TV shows is like Dracula, all fancy, or, you know, the Anne Rice books, movies, that they're, you know, just decked out in like fluffy velvet, whatever, but it's not like that, especially when you're poor and you're a kid moving around. You're not gonna have velvet, okay? Like, you just don't have velvet clothes, you don't have $500 fancy boots, you know, stuff like that. And so he related to this TV show about werewolves, and they were just like regular normal people living in like a, you know, a house or whatever, but then they're werewolves. And I have never heard of that show before, but it was a show when he was growing up. So I don't know how old Stephen Grahams Jones is, like maybe 70s or 80s, let's say, with that. So I don't insult him. If I say 60s, that might be mean. But yeah, thinking back on the 60s, I don't know if they would do like a whole TV show on like werewolves that are just, you know, going about their daily lives, and then I don't know. Maybe he was talking about the Munsters. Wait, does the Munsters have a werewolf? I need to figure this out on my own, not with you all. I'm sorry. I'm just anyway, I really want to read his other newer works because, like I said, you know, in the very beginning, there's just, you know, you kind of sort of risk having a not fully formed, not fantastically formed actually, story when you read earlier, like really early books from authors. And I have had discussions with readers and writers about this, and they're like, I'm hesitant to go back about, you know, if they have a few books, you know, that they've recently written and published, that they're nervous to go back like 5-10 years at the beginning of their publishing career, because those books aren't gonna match up with like the newer books and their style and the writing and storytelling usually. So I did decide to jump back in time. I'm excited for that, and I did like Mongrels. I think it's just early writing pains, and we all go through it if we're writers, so I don't mind, type of thing, because I'm sure, you know, my first book or my first poetry book, you know, something like that, is not going to be as great as, you know, book 7, or so. I get it, and I still enjoyed it even though it wasn't a 4 or a 5-star book. Now, thank you so much for watching my review on Mongrels. Have a great reading day. Bye!